Let me start by just introducing who you are, okay?
Okay.
Okay, because you're a VIP. We
Right.
want to make sure and get that on here. So we are here at the Crawford County Historical and Genealogical Society building in English today on September 24th of 2024. Bill Piper's the president of the Historical Society. I'm John Crawford. We'll be interviewing Gerald Hughes, who has lived in this county all of his life and has amazing stories to tell. We're going to focus on one particular story today, but we want to welcome you, Gerald, for coming, and thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
And we should probably thank your wife, too, for bringing you.
Better thank the good Lord, because I didn't know if I'd be able to or not. Some days I can't even get out of bed hardly.
We want to thank him every day. And Jim and Kay, thank you for being here, too. So we're here primarily to talk about the great Messamore mystery.
William Messamore.
Right, and I just wanted to share some basic information about him and then let you tell us a story, okay?
Okay.
Because William Messamore was born 16th of December 1916 in Christian County, Kentucky. And sometime in the late 1940s, he had bought a farm on Saltwell Hill. It's just up the hill from where, Gerald, you and your family lived. And by this time, William Messamore had robbed 2 banks and served time in the penitentiary when he moved to Crawford County. He was in his 30s, and if I recall correctly, you were about 15?
15.
Okay. So, Gerald, tell us the story. I mean, did you even know that Messamore was a convict at that point?
Had no thought. We just woke up one morning, and there's a strange car out there at the bottom of the hill. And I don't remember how we even met him, but later we found out that he was a nice man, William Messamore.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd always park at the same place at the bottom of the hill and walk up the hill. We thought he was just a good man.
Mm-hmm.
He'd stop by the house and talk once in a while, and he was a very friendly man. And but he was always kind of sneaking acting, I thought. And I told him one day, I was talking to him, and I said, we was on a first name basis. I said, Bill, I need a bicycle. I bought our girl's bicycle. He said, well, I've got one up at the house, I'll sell you. If my mother knew what he was, she'd have went. So I said, I'll just walk up there with you. And I walked up there with him, and we had a good conversation up the hill. And he told me he wanted $10 for the bicycle, and I think I offered him $8. We negotiated a while between 8 and I don't know who won. But he told me, he said, I'm just a poor man. He said, I need money because I'm going hungry. And I felt sorry for him. And come to find out later, he had a lot of money in a vault someplace where he'd robbed a bank. But we never had one thought in our life that there's anything wrong with him. Never. And he'd stop and talk and always very friendly with mom and dad, but my mother never did trust him. Never.
May I ask a question now? He bought this house, but there was a farm too, wasn't there?
Yes, but he only got 20 acres.
20.
But he didn't buy it because he couldn't buy it. He was a convict. His mother bought it.
Oh, so he didn't do any farming?
No.
Okay, he just lived there.
Just lived. He wasn't there very much. He'd come and stay a day or two and be gone, and he'd come back, and I think at some place it said he's going left to Gratsburg Road and crossed the bridge. Well, there's no bridge down there at that time. It's just a creek, and you forded the creek if you could ford it. If you didn't, you parked over and walked. Mm-hmm. And he'd always park in the same place, walk up the top of the hill, and he'd stop occasionally and talk. And then there was a family that lived up there. I think the pictures, there's her picture right there. Tommy and Beatrice Uh, they were very poor, and they lived in a little 3-room log house, and he didn't work, and he lived off of the government. He got a pension for being in the service, and one day his little log house burned, and he moved in. Messamore invited them to move in with him, and they did. They had this 16-year-old girl. That's her.
Wanda Johnson.
That's her.
Mm-hmm.
And she was already living with Messamore.
Mm-hmm.
She had already moved in with him, and they moved in with him. And he claimed that when they got to question him, they asked him about the house burning. And he said, well, he had a still,
Mm-hmm.
and he was making. Well, Tommy even had enough sense to make that still. He wouldn't know. He didn't even drink. He couldn't have made a still. But anyway, that's what they said when they arrested him, and he is in and out of a lot of jails, a lot. He'd take him to court, and he'd escape. He escaped one time and locked the jailer and his deputy both in the cell, and he jumped out of a 2-story window, and they tracked him. He went to the Ohio River, and he stole a little raft, and he paddled himself across the Ohio River in that little raft, and they knew where he'd come out at Brandenburg, and they was waiting on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he told them, said, oh, you've caught me, but you won't keep me. And
But
they didn't.
They put him in Paducah's jail then, right?
After a time, they
Yeah.
did, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it went on, and they got after these people disappeared. They'd question him a lot, and he'd tell them this and he'd tell them that. And I got ahead of myself. My uncle lived out in Irmal. He was a coon hunter,
Mm-hmm.
and he had 2 beautiful dogs, a blue tick and another one. Well, the blue tick disappeared. And later, the other one disappeared. And Irmal drank awful bad, and he come down home when Messamore was parked out there right in front of our house, close near to the street in front of our house. And he come down there one night drunk, and Dad said, what are you doing? They called him Hominy. So what are you doing, Hominy? He said, I'm down here, I'm going to make Messamore tell me where my dogs are at. He had a shotgun. He heard Messamore coming. I think probably about 8 o'clock. It was just a little after dark. And he run out with his shotguns. We thought, well, there's going to be trouble. So I walked out. I was nosy. I walked out with him. And he was just as nice as could be. He said, Bill, I want to know if you've ever seen my dogs, this and that. And he swore out a warrant against him about those dogs. And he said, no, I didn't. And he had some kind of a coat on, and he unzipped it, and a big white rabbit jumped out of the back of his coat into the back of his car. And her dad had a big white rabbit, Arletta. I said, I'll bet you that's Glenn Brown's big white rabbit. So after he left, I walked over there, but Glenn Brown still had his white rabbit. So I don't know where he got the white rabbit, but anyway, he'd come and go a lot, and just I never was afraid of him, never. My mother was. She always did. She never trusted him, never.
So after Vanderveers disappeared, Messamore ended up in jail, not because of them. He ended up in jail because of this complaint about the dogs, right?
Stealing.
And that's why he ended up in the Corden jail, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because of dog stealing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll probably get ahead of myself, but after he went to prison, he was in Alcatraz.
Mm-hmm.
And me and Dad was bird hunting one day over by Union Chapel, and the weeds was pretty high where we sat. We saw a man walking, just taking big steps as far as he could, and Messamore had wrote my uncle Irmal a letter from Alcatraz. My uncle had moved from Mifflin to Fort Wayne, and he got his address some way,
Mm-hmm.
and he wrote him a letter. He said, "Dear Mr. Hughes, I'll be due for," he was in Alcatraz, "I'll be due for parole before too long. And when I get out, the only charge against me will be dog stealing." He said, "I have a question. Did you pay dog tax on those dogs? If you didn't, you cannot charge me because you have to pay taxes on a dog." And he wouldn't even answer him. He never did. But he was just a lot of things that went on up there that we never did understand. and he'd come by the house at all hours, and he had it on. And there was a story wrote said he always had a new automobile and wore suits and had a circle driveway. He didn't even have a driveway, just mud in front of his house, and people lived there before had a horse and wagon. That's all they had, and he never drove home very often.
Gerald, when he got out of Alcatraz, and so he's out of prison.
No, they sent him to Eddyville.
Eddyville, and then after Eddyville, he's finished his term.
Right.
Did he ever come back to live
No.
there in his old place? No.
He moved to Louisville,
Mm.
and he worked he lived close to the Elton Railroad, and I knew just about where he lived. And every time Mom and Dad would come up to visit, we lived in Floyd Knobs, and they'd come up to visit us, and Dad would say, "You know where Messamore lives?" I said, "Yeah." "Let's go over and visit him." And Mom would just go into orbit. Said, "You'll have him coming back down there. You're not going." She'd get very angry with us. We never did go, but I've wondered a lot of times what would have happened had we went.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Pete Eastridge, well, there's a lot of sheriffs that tried to investigate it. Marcus Lane was sheriff when all this happened, and then Jones was sheriff, and another man, I can't think, 2 or 3 more sheriffs, and they all investigated, and they was all going to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
But Pete Eastridge was the last one that ever talked about it, and Pete got acquainted with him.
Mm-hmm.
He knew where he lived, and him and his deputy went to visit him one day, not in uniform.
Mm-hmm.
And he let him come in, but he told him, said, "Now you sit there, and you sit there, and don't move." They said he had the house booby-trapped, and he told them he did.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat there and talked to him, not as a lawman, just talked to him. And Pete said, when I got home, he said, "Run along, I got a phone call." And Messamore said, "Now when you were here, I knew you were law." And he said, "I didn't tell you anything, but he said, I want to meet you." And Pete said, "Where you want to meet me?" And he said, on the interstate, there used to be a place you could pull off going towards Cordon.
Mm-hmm.
It's not there anymore, but he said, "I want to meet
Between the exit at Carefree
Yes,
and
97.5,
right.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I want to meet you right there." And Pete said, I told him, I'll be there.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I went, and he said, there was a great big limousine sitting there. And he said, I said to myself, I'm in trouble. If I get out, he'll have me killed. But he said, I got in the car with him. He said, we sat there and talked for a length of time. And Messamore told him, said, "Now, I know you're the law, but I'm going to tell you some things I've never told one human being. And if it gets out before I'm dead, I'll know who told it." And after Pete come down to the house after he died, and he sat there and talked at the table for a long time. And he said, Messamore told me that he said, I didn't do away with just 3 people up there. He said, I done away with 9 people on that hill. And he said, why'd you do it? He said, they got in my way. Mm-hmm. And he said, we talked for a long time, and I finally left and went out home, and he said, that I know I get ahead of myself, but my mother always said that there was a doctor involved in that, always. And he was from Milltown. I cannot think of his name. Mm-hmm. But after Pete told me, he said, there's a doctor involved in this, and he said, I will not get him involved until he's dead. But after he's dead, I want to tell this. And he come down there and told me that story. And he said that doctor died. But he said, Messamore told me. Pete said Messamore told him before he died. He said, I killed those 3 people, and I cut them up like butchering a hog. Said I had barrels sitting there, and I'd take an arm off of one and a leg off the other, and I mixed their parts all up. And when I got them mixed up, I loaded them in my old car, and I took them to Cape Sandy. Knew right where he took them.
Uh-huh.
And Pete said that doctor said, he's telling you the truth. I stood there and watched him. Said he knocked holes in the barrel and took them out in the middle of the Ohio River and dumped them. And that's what he told him. Said that's where they're at. And Pete done some investigating, and he found out that he had a wife that lived out west someplace, and he got her name, and he called her and asked her, said, "Will you come and tell us stories about him?" She said, "If you'll pay my way." He said, "All right, I will pay your way." But he called her back and she wouldn't come. But she told him, said, "I can tell you where he buried a young lady up there." So I was there when he killed her. He said, "Well, where'd he bury her?" He said, "There's a sewer ran across the road right almost in front of his house, and he buried her right in front of that sewer." And Pete and my brother, here they went with their metal detectors, and they hunted and hunted. They never found a thing. Nobody ever found a trace of anything, as far as I know. But he had the day that me and Dad, when all this had happened, he come down home on a Wednesday night. Dad saw him coming.
Messamore?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
After the Vanderveer, nobody knew they disappeared, but we hadn't seen him.
Mm-hmm.
And we just wondered what had happened. Well, he come down home on a Wednesday night, and we was getting ready to go to church. And Dad saw him coming. He said, "Come on in, Bill." And he didn't even knock. He just come in to sit down, and they got to talking about this and that. Finally, Messamore said, "Arm, have you saw the Vanderveers?" And Dad said, "No, we haven't. We thought maybe you had." He said, "No, I've been gone. I've been to, I believe he said Washington, state of Washington. And I just now got back, and they're gone." And Dad said, "Well, we haven't seen them. We don't know where they're at." And that was on a Wednesday. On a Sunday, still the 16th of whatever month it was, nobody had seen him. And me and my uncle Everett and Wayne Goldman and Dad, we decided we'd just walk up there. We walked up there, and he'd taken the linoleum out of his house and taken it out there in the road and burned it, most of it, all of it would burn. And then he'd taken that old wheelbarrow that I saw him making. He'd show me the wheel somebody gave him. He'd taken the wheelbarrow, he'd hauled something from the road. He'd taken something to the road, and then he went out there about probably 50, 60 feet, and there's a great big high hill. And he'd shove somebody or something over that hill, because you could see where it dislodged little bushes and leaves and what have you, and rocks. And then he'd taken that wheelbarrow to the bottom of the hill, and he'd made a lot of trips from the bottom of the hill out to that overhanging rock, and it's a big overhanging rock, and there was rocks pretty far apart at the bottom of the hill, and whatever he'd taken down there, he'd hauled out there and put between those rocks, and he'd had a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I always did think that he'd burn the bodies all that he could and then get rid of the rest of them. And they found charred bones in there, and they picked, Marcus Lane was sheriff, and they picked pieces of them out and sent them to have been analyzed, but they said they would burn so bad they couldn't tell if it was human or animal.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the end of that one, but I always did think that he burned them there, and what didn't burn, that he got rid of it. But of course, he didn't. He told Pete a completely different story, so nobody will ever know.
Well, Gerald, I know in one of the accounts it says on January 7th, 1949 was the last time anybody ever remembered seeing the Vanderveers. They were getting their mail.
Her dad, or that his mom and dad saw.
Okay. So,
and then they walked up the hill. My mother was, I'm nosy, but Mama worse than me. You didn't miss a trick on my mother. She knew everything that was going on down there. And she saw him go up the hill for the last time. And Beatrice was a little skinny woman. And she always walked about 25 foot in front of Tom. Tom was stooped and lazy. He didn't like to work at all and wouldn't work. And she saw him go up the hill for the last time. And of course, like I say, we wasn't too concerned until he come down there and talked to us. We still wasn't very concerned until Sunday after that, when me and Dad and my cousin and Everett Smith walked up there and we saw all that had happened.
mm-hmm.
And so the mystery goes on and on and on.
Including, I think you saw a couple of what looked like bullet holes, right?
And yes, and that's the house right there.
This picture,
That's their
right
house.
here. Uh-huh.
And then where they slept, we knew pretty much where they slept.
Mm-hmm.
But it just goes on and on and on. There was one time after this had all happened, and Messamore had been to Alcatraz and back at Eddyville and probably out of prison at the time. Well, my first wife had multiple sclerosis and she couldn't get out of bed. And I'd gone someplace, and I wasn't gone long because I was afraid to leave her. But anyway, when I come home, she said, Gerald, there's been some old man. Said he's knocked on every door trying to get in. And she said, I couldn't get up to talk to him. I said, yeah, he'll be back maybe. About a week, she could see out the bedroom window, or out the door, and she said, that old man's coming back. And so I went to the door, and he said, I want to come in and talk to you. And I said, okay, come on in. He said, now, and he said, I want to talk to you about up on the hill. I said, did you live around here when that happened? He said, no. I said, well, did you read the part that I put in the paper about it? He said, no. I said, well, how do you know about it? He said, well, I just know about it. And he talked and talked and talked. And I might not allowed to say this in front of a mixed company, but he said, you had sex with Wanda. Only he said that plain. I said, no, I didn't. He said, you're lying. I know you did. I said, no, Hughes might have, but it wasn't this Hughes. The Hughes lived up the road that went up there every night to see her. It was that Hughes. And he just kept questioning about different things that went on up there. And finally, after about an hour, I told him, I said, now, my wife's handicapped and she can't get out of bed and I have to take care of her. I can't talk any longer. So he raised up to leave, and I looked out at the car and I saw some woman. And I said, is that your wife? No, my wife's in a nursing home. That's just somebody I run around with. Well, he hadn't got turned around till my imagination ran wild. I told my wife, I said, that's Wanda. And as I said, they're here trying to find out what I know. And I told her, or she said later, we talked about it. She said, no, he'd stop and talk to Dad every time he was here about being up on the hill. But I'll die thinking that was Wanda, that they had redone her face, and she was a completely different looking person because they said Wanda was never killed. I knew a fellow that done a lot of investigating, and he said, no, Wanda was never killed. He said she was seen in New Albany, applying for a job later than that. And I think he's probably telling the truth. I don't think she was killed.
Gerald, I may be a bit confused, but this man that knocked on your door and the ladies in the car, who was that man?
I have no idea.
Oh, don't know.
I went and talked to Sheriff Scott. He said, oh, I know him. He had nothing to do with it, and that's all that was ever said about it. But I don't know who he was. He just questioned me about things that went on up there. But then her dad, Arletta's dad, he said, well, he'd stop here and talk to me every time he went by. Wanted to know what went on up on the hill, up on that hill.
You know, I think you told me the house you live in was built by your grandparents, right?
Right.
So your family has lived there a long time.
My grandparents built it, lived there till they died, and was laid out in the home. And my dad and Mom died. Mom didn't die there, but she lived there till she did die. They both died there. And my first wife died there. I'll be the next one.
And you know what? It was great to visit with you, and you have kept your family home that's been in the family for generations. It's a wonderful home you have there.
It's it was built in, I can't remember, Dad'd be 100 and some years old, and he was 2 years old when they built it. And my grandfather, Raleigh Pavey, that lived in Mifflin, he was a carpenter, so-called carpenter. And he built it. And we moved in it, and Mom and Dad lived there all their life.
Now, you told me a story that I'd love to you tell us again. Why is that road named what it is?
Saltwell Hill?
Yeah.
Because they was drilling for oil one time, many years ago. And they hit a little oil, that they had salt water. And they started using that salt water. They drilled another well and they found salt water. And they took 100 gallons of salt water to make a bushel of salt.
Uh-huh.
And they had a furnace right down where I live. They had used great big sandstone rocks. And that's where they'd boil that water and make salt.
Down by the creek?
No, right close to our house.
Oh, close to your house, okay.
That's where they'd make the salt. And it said that in a book said every farmer wanted a bushel of salt to start the winter. And so they named that Saltwell Hill because of the salt wells.
Oh, why did the farmers want a bushel of salt to start the winter? What did they use it for?
I have livestock and stuff like that. And the ground where that used to run out, is for probably 1,000 feet. The ground is just as wide as this table. That's salt. And there wasn't any deers then, but cattle would actually break out of the farmers couldn't buy salt. They didn't have any money. They'd actually break out of her mom and dad's cows would break out to get over to get to lick that salt.
Right there, salt, making salt.
Right.
And they were selling it. That was a commercial business operation, right?
Had a great big furnace.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, my grandfather died. They were so poor back then. People were poor, and they were so poor that they couldn't even take him to a funeral home. And some of Dad's relatives come someplace to English and bought him a suit, and they took him home and they put the suit on him best they could. And they had to bury him the next day.
Which was something that often happened here in Crawford County at that time, right?
And my mother,
having a wake at home.
My mother and my aunt said that the day they left, I guess they carried him in a wagon to the church. And still the church that Pastor Spear pastors now. It was a church then. And they carried it. They said that as soon as they left the house, there was a dove, a white dove, and said it followed right over his casket till they got to the church. And she said it lit in the corner of that old church. It's still there. And said it never moved. So they brought him out. They put him in the ground and said it watched. It turned his head and watched as he started to put him in the ground. It flew away. Nobody ever saw it since. But she said it always worried my grandmother was a pretty evil old woman, and she didn't believe in many things, but they said that always worried her about that dove and how it flew. But there's so many things that happened down there that if I believed in ghosts, I'd tell you there's ghosts down there. I don't believe in them, but
Do you remember your grandfather?
No.
Okay, he died.
I was 2 years old when he died.
Okay.
But of course, Mom and Dad lived with their parents.
Yeah.
And Mom said he had a Jew's harp, and said he'd play that Jew's harp and get me to dance for it. And she said he carried me every place he went. If he went to get the cows, I was always with him. She said he thought so much of you.
Gerald, separate from the Messamore story, can I ask you a couple of questions related to you and your life?
Right.
Okay. Well, you've got a few years on all of us. You're in your 90s now, right? 92? 92. Okay. So we're here to learn. So the question is, you've got a lot of life experience. You've learned a lot. If you could tell your 25-year-old self something, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Be a Christian. Don't drink. Don't run around and do things like you've done. That'd be my advice. Be a Christian. In fact, we had a guest speaker one time where the pastor took the church. And as he's leaving, and I was leaving, he hollered at me. He said, "Mr. Hughes, don't leave. I want to talk to you." And everybody was gone. I said, what do you want to talk about? He said, I'll ask you a question. I said, ask. He said, what's the biggest difference you see in things now than there was back then? I said, the church. They're completely different. It's not even like it used to be. And he said, I've talked to a lot of people. That's what everybody says. It's all different.
How is it different? How would you describe that?
The churches,
Mm-hmm.
people used to go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Now they don't.
Mm-hmm.
They don't go very often unless they think they're going to die. Then sometimes they'll go. But there was at one time, and then I can't remember what year it was, but there was church at Bethany or Tick Ridge. They called it Tick Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cemetery there now. The old church building's still standing. And there was a preacher came one time. Nobody knew where he came from or who he was. He just told him, he said, I'm a preacher and I'd like to start a revival at this church. And they told him, go ahead. And that revival went on for 13 weeks. And there was over 200 people at that altar. My uncle that lived down there, he said that they had it mornings and night, every day. And he said one morning I had my chopping axe and I was clearing new ground, and he said the bell started ringing, and he said the Lord spoke to me and said, it's now or never. And he said I threw that old chopping axe in the brush pile, and I went home and got opal, and he said we're going to church. And he said we got saved, and we haven't looked back.
That was the
But
defining moment.
So there's a lot of change in the churches, a lot.
Well,
And nobody worships the Lord. Used to on Sunday, you was in church.
mm-hmm.
I went to church if I wanted to or not. You didn't say no. You went.
Mm-hmm. It was a given. Go to
Right.
church. You've lived a few years, so you've seen some changes in this world.
I have.
Technology and jobs and medicine and who knows what else. But as you look back on your time, what are some of the biggest, in your opinion, biggest changes or biggest events?
Well, I guess at the time it was Messamore.
Yeah.
That was a big event back then.
Huge. Still is, isn't it?
Still is.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw so many changes in work habits and places where you work and automobiles, and back then nobody hardly had an automobile. And I bought me an old car at one time, and it wasn't a very good car, and I wanted it painted, and my mother took a paintbrush and painted that old car, and it was shiny.
It was shiny and it worked.
It worked.
It worked.
Going to work one day, and it had they called it knee action, I think, and the front end was wore out.
Yeah.
You had to take a full turn before you caught up the wheels. And I got over in the middle of the road in the rock, and it got going back and forth, and I turned it over right inside of over in a ditch. And this fellow riding with me, we got out and we went and got my uncle to take us to Tazewell to catch a ride. I just left the car turned over. He said, where are you going? I said, leave her there, I don't care. And I got back, somebody turned it back up on its wheels.
Do you recall what kind of car that was, by the way?
A 35 Chevy.
35 Chevy. Now, can you tell us what's one of the funniest things you've ever seen in your life?
It would be hard to think about that one.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot of funny things, I guess.
Does anything come to mind?
No, not
No?
really.
Well, that's okay. Let me ask you another question. So, there's a lot of people that are looking to, how can I really be happy? How can I have some peace and happiness? What advice would you give them?
Give your heart to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get out. I got in sin so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Them things I was so ashamed of. I'd come home at night, and my mother never slept a wink. Though her family was all in, and she'd lock the door because she'd want to see if I was drinking. And I'd knock on the door and I'd say, "Mom, I'm home." I'd hold my breath so she couldn't know that I'd been drinking, but she knew I'd been drinking.
Mm-hmm.
But Mom never criticized me for it. She'd always, when she did, a time or two when she did, I said, "Mom," she said, "you're going to get killed." I said, "What is to be will be." Back then I told
Would
you
you like
there's
some
no,
water?
yes. I told you there's no bridge down there. Well, I had bought a nice 42 Ford, nice, pretty little car. And I was so proud of it. I come in one day, like I said, we had to ford the creek. Well, she started to ford the creek, and she didn't ford the creek. It drowned it out of her. She got her Letta's dad to pull it out with his team of horses. It parked right there on the side of the road, and I said, "Mom, what in the world did you do?" She said, "I drowned your." I said, "Mom," I was pitching a little fit. She said, "What is to be will be." So that's the end of that. But my mother was a good person. She put up with so much.
That's a good example of the impact parents and family can have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the old Saltwell Hill, that's why it was named as Saltwell Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be actually good car. You could travel it. You can't anymore because DNR wanted me to have it closed, and I finally got it closed.
Mm-hmm.
But people got awful angry about it. They come down there one day, the DNR, and they had their sheriff with them. My first wife was living then, and she kept questioning them, saying, "Well, what are you here for?" "Oh, we just wanted to see if you was all right." And finally she asked me again, said, "Now you're here for a reason, why?" And they said, "Well, we're surprised that people haven't burned your house." Said, "We've had threats because you have closed that road that they're going to burn your house." But they left their number. Said, "If anybody, you call us, we'll be here instantly."
Mm-hmm.
But nobody ever threatened us or anything. But I saw so many changes in that hill way we lived. And over in the middle of the field, you know what sulfur water is? Yeah, there used to be one here. There was a great big sulfur well. It had an encasement in it, probably 30 inches across, around. It was a round thing.
Big.
And me and my dad loved that stuff. We'd walk
To drink it.
Yeah. It's probably before we made the VFW, we had to walk. We'd walk over 2 or 3 times a week. We lay down on our bellies just like a hog. Stick our head down there and drink that water.
So tell us.
But let me tell you something.
Okay.
You didn't drink that much unless you was close to a bathroom.
It had immediate effects then. What did it taste like? And what did it smell like?
It smelled like rotten eggs. Probably tastes like a rotten egg.
And okay, I think we're all wondering, why did you want to drink that?
I liked it.
You liked it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you ever, you know where old Sulfur's at?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There used to be a well down there. I've got a history book at home. And there's so many people came down to Old Sulfur that there was a hotel up on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I think it could have 475 guests maybe. And the old sulfur well over there, they had a dome built over it.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a sign up for sale, 10 cents a gallon. And they said people come from every place to get that sulfur water. And I've got a picture that showed people sitting up around that swinging bridge where you went from the hotel over to the sulfur well. And they said on a Sunday or on a weekend, there'd be hundreds of people come there to get that sulfur water.
That's interesting because there was sulfur well near your house Sulfur, Indiana. English had Sulfur Well.
Yes.
Then you get to French Lick and West Baden, and they did as well.
They sell
My
it.
parents has. They're where my mom lives now. There's actually a sulfur well. They use it still.
Oh, they do.
They don't drink it. They use it for showering and stuff.
Where
But
at, French Lick?
no, she lives north of English.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just a little house that she owns. But their wells, it's sulfur water. It stinks.
They sell that stuff at French Lick.
Oh, they do.
Yeah. They have semis where they load that stuff up.
Well, we'll have to try that
Supposedly
someday.
it's good for the skin.
Uh-huh.
Like that's what she said. It always makes her skin really soft. Now, I wouldn't drink it personally. Yeah.
That's a
And
great story.
that sulfur, it used to run out great big streams.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's come, and it did for years. And the people that bought it, somehow they've stopped that up and it don't run a thing, nothing. It's completely dry.
Okay. Bill, did you have any other questions?
That old, there was an old preacher.
Yeah.
No, he wasn't a preacher. He's a singer. He impersonates Elvis. I can't think who he is, but he sings around here in different places.
Uh-huh.
He was the preacher, and down there at Old Sulfur, he built him a place. He's going to have is a wedding chapel up on the bank, and he's going to have weddings there. I don't think he ever had one, but he had a nice place, and it's still there. The place is, but
Oh, it is.
as you go into Old Sulfur, just to get
Did he die?
who Elvis?
Yeah,
No,
he did. No, I didn't think he had, but I didn't know.
I think somebody bought that building. I don't think it's.
he probably did.
Yeah, because I drove by it not too long
I
ago.
think he
and-
lost. I think he lost it.
Yeah, somebody's living there now. I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. But yeah.
Well, I wonder then, everything comes back, it seems. Maybe sulfur water is going to make a comeback. And will you drink it again?
I love it.
Okay.
In fact, people that bought that property across from Dad, they drained that sulfur well into the creek, and it still runs a stream, not as big as that glass, but about as big as two fingers. It runs a stream continuously into the creek.
Uh-huh.
I've never gone over to catch any of it, but sometimes I'm tempted.
Tell them about your first job at Orleans.
Went to work in Orleans, Indiana in 1949, as soon as I got out of high school.
You went to Langford, and that's after you went to Langford?
After I got out of high school, I graduated from English high school.
Oh, English high school. Okay. What year was that?
49.
49. Okay.
And after I got out of high school, I went right to Orleans.
Uh-huh.
Travel, radio, and TV. They made TVs. They made a cabinet that was worth, today it'd be worth $500 a cabinet would. And they put a little TV screen that's about that big. I worked up there for years, never saw one work. But I went to work for 75 cents an hour. Paid her brother, Arletta's brother, 75 cents to ride with him. And there was a hamburger place out in the middle of the parking lot. We'd go out there and get her lunch. 2 hamburgers. They called it cream soda then. It was a big red, but the 16-inch cream soda and 2 hamburgers was 25 cents.
What a deal. And you were making 75 cents an
Cents
hour.
an hour, paid
Yeah.
75 for my ride.
Mm-hmm.
And I spraying, stain.
Mm-hmm.
I'll brag on myself. I was good.
Because this was a pretty wood cabinet, right?
Beautiful.
Mhm.
And they changed one time. They remodeled everything, and they had a conveyor belt that brought those TVs up to us. And I was the first one that got the TV when it came up there. And I had 1 minute to stain it inside and out.
Mhm.
If I didn't, it moved on. And come home at night and my legs just be that red. And I said one day, I'm gonna quit. Or thinking I was. But one day I was standing up there spraying and somebody come by from West Baden.
Mm-hmm.
He said, let's quit. I said, when? Tonight? He said, let's quit right now. I said, just give me time to get my apron off. I got my apron off and hung it up. We clocked out, and I hitchhiked to English.
And that was it.
They sent me word to come back, and I went back the next day. And Miss Reese was the one that done the hiring and firing. And she said, we want you to come back. I said, well, I will, but I want spray. She said, well, we don't, if you want spray, we don't need you. I said, well, then you don't need me. And I had drove that day, and I drove back to English and didn't work for a long time. And Dallas Curl come by one day, and he saw my car, and he said, Gerald, you working? I said, no. He said, go with me tomorrow. They'll put you to work for the, I was just 18. He said, they'll put you to work right tomorrow for the railroad. So I went, got out there, and the old foreman, he's Gerald Wright. He lived at Tazewell, I think. And he said, what do you want, boy? I said, they need a job. He said, get on there. These men are going to work right now. And that's how they hired me. I went to work and come in at noon. He said, if you want to eat with us, you have to sign up. You'll have to pay for your meal. So I signed up and paid for my meals. And I worked there for probably a year or so. And they made us start traveling. And I come in one day from, I think we'd been to Scott Air Force Base or someplace working. And I come in, and Paul Trusty was the foreman. He hollered at me and said, come over here. I thought, now he is a grouchy old man. I thought he'd gonna fire me for something. I walked over and he said, this old man right here is an electrician and he needs a helper. And I told him you'd make him a good one. Said, you want to go with him? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, you try it. And if you don't like it, I'll let you come back to work for me. I said, okay, I'll try it for a week and see. Well, the first day I knew I wasn't going back. Because me and that old man, we didn't have very much to do. Well, we worked, but we didn't have to work hard like we did. And I wanted to be an electrician anyway.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up being a pretty good electrician.
Pretty good electrician. And you worked for the railroad how long?
46 years.
46 years. And retired from the railroad, right?
Retired from the railroad.
Okay. What railroad was that?
The one that goes through English.
Which was that the Southern?
Southern at that time.
Yeah.
But I worked a lot of different places. I went to work I worked in Ludlow, Kentucky. I worked in Chattanooga. And I lived different places when I worked for the railroad.
Uh-huh.
But I enjoyed every day of it. And my wife, when I was 64, I was going to retire. And she said, please don't quit. Please don't quit. I said, yeah, I'm going to retire. I've worked long enough. I retired. And the next day I sat and cried.
Why is that?
I didn't want to retire. I hated to retire. I've hated every day since. Even after I married her, I told her, if I was able, I'd go right back to work.
What is it you miss about work?
People.
People?
We had it in our Sunday school class one day at Mifflin. Neil Belcher was doing the teaching. He said, anybody that's here that look forward to getting up every morning and going to work, hold their hand up. I was the only one. He said, you look for it. I said, I did. I couldn't wait for morning to come. I love to go to work. I love to work. And I still love it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Then I was retired.
More good advice for all of us. And by the way, Arletta, thank you for prompting that story.
Yes.
Are there some more good stories lurking here?
No, he's got lots of them.
I told you how I met her, didn't I?
Well, tell us.
Well, my wife had died.
Mm-hmm.
Her sister, she's handicapped. She had multiple sclerosis. Her sister came and helped take care of her. Well, I knew Arletta a little bit, and I knew her husband was dead. And Brand say, her husband's been dead for almost 5 years, and she's never had one date. And said, we're hoping she don't date. Said, we thought so much of her husband, we don't want her to ever marry again. Well, I called her one night. One night. I said, Arletta, can I come over and talk to you? And she was sure. I went and knocked on the door, and she invited me in. I went in and sat down. I said, now, Arletta, I'm not here looking for a wife. I'm not looking here for a girlfriend. I'm just looking for a friend. So we done that for probably 2 or 3 months. I'd sit here and she was about as far as k's away from me. Well, one night I ventured over and I sat down and she's sitting there and I sat down on the floor and leaned up against her legs and she didn't kick me. I thought, well, I'm making a little progress. And one night, about 11 o'clock, I said, I gotta go home. She said, no, you don't need to hurry home. So I didn't hurry home. I stayed till about 1 o'clock before I went home. And I could tell you so many things about our relationship, but one night I'd never kissed her, never. And one night she's behind her dad had an old oil stove. And she was behind that stove for some reason, and I slipped over and I gave her a real sweet kiss. No, she looked at me so mean, like, I don't want to kill you. And we had a good time even when we was dating.
But she didn't. Did she eventually smile?
She liked it.
Okay. And this is all true, Arletta, right?
And
I guess.
I asked her one
It
time.
just surprised me.
I asked her one time if she'd marry me, and she said, well, I don't know. I have to think about this. Didn't take her long, but she told me one day, I think we was at Huntingburg in a park. I asked her, I said, would you marry me? She said, yes, I would. So the rest is history.
Now that is a great love story.
So we went I made the arrangements. We was going to Pigeon Forge, or we was going to Gatlinburg. We ended up in Pigeon Forge. We did go to a preacher. I had some people that lived here in English. They were Christian people, and they'd gone down there and got married. And I said, where can we go? And she told me exactly where to go and where it was at. And we went and got married. And our little wedding chapel burned when they had them awful fires in Gatlinburg a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a good time while we was down there. We went and seen a lot of things. We went to a cave. We didn't have any idea where it was at, but you went straight down into a cave in Pigeon Forge, and that's where the moonshiners used to make moonshine.
Huh.
They'd make it because they couldn't catch them. The only way in and out was that one place where you went straight up and straight down.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But that's where we spent our honeymoon, in Pigeon Forge. Come home on a Sunday. We went to I wanted to show her off. We went to my old church at Albany, and some relation of hers there, Geneva Fitch. She said, "That's my cousin that he married." She's so proud that we got married. And we've had a wonderful time. I've told people, as far as I know, I've got angry at her one time, and I was angry. I admit it, but I apologize. 2 times.
2 times she got really angry.
2 times in 20 years. And somebody, I've told them at church, she may get angry, but she don't show it. She don't say that. She'll just sull up like a possum. Won't say a word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But she's a different breed. She's a brown. And they don't die. They just live on and on. I told her, I said, you all just live on and on and on. Finally just disintegrate into thin air and you're gone.
That is quite a family trait.
And she's got a brother my age. We grew up together. We rode bicycles together,
Uh-huh.
played basketball together. And he's got Alzheimer's. He don't know if he's where he's at. He's in special home for people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank the good Lord every day that I still have a fairly good mind.
You do. And you have great stories, and we really appreciate you sharing them. I don't have any more questions, but I do want to, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about before we wrap up here?
No, I guess not. I could tell you a lot about Messamore, the things that when he'd come out of the house, how I'd always try to go out and talk to him, And he'd always nice and so friendly. And he told, after he started living with Wanda, he told Mom one time, he said, I bought your daughter, Janice, and Ronnie, I bought them a Christmas present. He said, but we got hungry and we eat it. It was a candy bar. We bought them for Christmas. But Mom, they used to come down home, Mom said, and she'd pop popcorn for her and him and Wanda.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd sit and talk for a while. And she said, I was always so glad when they'd leave. And she said they'd invite us to come up to see him, but we never did go.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a likable cuss. He really was.
Sounds likable. He sounds like he was a smart person too, in his way.
I think in that book that I had a little bit to do with it, I said that he was smart, but he's always sneaking acting, and he was.
Mm-hmm.
I remember. Before I leave, I want to read you just one little thing that's in this, if I can do it,
Sure.
and then I'm through. Whoever Fitch wrote this, about all of them, about Bill and about my mother Nell and things like that. But he said, the mystery shall not be solved till time on earth shall be dissolved. We shall stand before the King and give account of everything. Yes, judgment day shall bring to light the hidden evil of the night. I'll be there, my friend, and you and Messamore and Tommy too. Don't think because he murdered 3, you're not as guilty as he, unless repentance has been done and the victory has been won.
Yeah.
So true.
Well said.
So true.
Well said.
But Wheeler said he wrote the story about the mystery man. He said, I was sitting there one day and I got to thinking about that, and he said, Dan, and I wrote all about your dad, about Orm, and about Erm, that was my Uncle Erm, about your mother Nellie. He said, he wrote something about every one of them. And Dalton Stelvey, that was my aunt, and she was a pretty evil woman. And she came down there one day when they was up on the hill, and they burned a house, an outhouse, and she was in on it. And he said for her it was vacation time, down to the country so sublime. Her mouth she forgot to latch. She said, I saw him strike the match. She said, I'll not a witness be, and to Wisconsin she did flee. But when she reached her hometown, before her foot had touched the ground, there stood a marshal of this land with a summons in his hand. He said, come and see us soon, he said. To her the summons he did read. And they made her come back and testify, all the way from Wisconsin, because Howard King had burned the outhouse. And she saw him.
She did go to account on that.
She did. And that wasn't long after that till the house burned. Nobody could ever prove it, but they're pretty sure who did it. And then after that, they brought a little bulldozer. No, I think just a grader. And they graded all into that house where the house stood, thinking maybe that Messamore had taken the floor up and buried him under there. Of course, they didn't find anything. But they found a lot of things when they'd be searching. They found Wanda's dog, pet dog, he killed and buried. And they'd see a place and they'd dig, and he'd maybe just buried a can lid or a glass jar, just anything to throw him off. He was a funny dude. And my mother, she died. There was a fellow from our church, a young man in a bad automobile accident, and he was over in the hospital where Messamore died at. When Messamore, I didn't have any thought that Messamore was in there, but if I'd have known it, because we went to see this young man about it every 2 or 3 nights, if I'd have known Messamore was in the hospital, I went and talked to him. And if he knew he was dying, he might, by chance, told me what went on. But he died. Nobody claimed his body. Nobody even wanted his body. So they donated him to science.
Yeah, let's see, he died 12th of February 1986 in Louisville, donated his body to the University of Louisville Medical School.
Right. You know what they do to them?
No.
They skin them.
Oh,
We had a young lady from our church, not out of our church. She was a guest speaker, her and her husband at our church, and they went home with us. And she talked for a while. And she said, "I got to go home." We said, "For what?" She said, "Well, I've got to skin my whatever she called him. He was dead, and she had to skin him." Done reading. People donate their bodies
Mm-hmm.
to science, and that was her job.
Her job for the medical research and all those things they do. Gerald Hughes, thank you for coming and sharing your stories today.
My mind's not very clear. If it's clear, I could tell you so much.
Your mind seems awfully clear to us, and these stories are great.
and we can talk forever.
Gerald, the Bill has recorded this. Do you mind if we use this for meetings and put it on
No.
our website so
Do
people can
anything
hear
you
it?
want.
Okay. We appreciate that.
Just don't tell my preacher that I told tales.
Okay, we won't tell him.
They'll boot me out of the church.